Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us tonight for our Care Management Alliance of New York third webinar, which is on the 2026 New York State budget, the legislative agenda, and what's at stake for intellectual and developmental disability IDD services. We are the Care Management Alliance of New York, and collectively we are the 7 care coordination organizations across New York State that serve approximately 130,000 children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities through the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disability system. And I'd like to introduce our presenter tonight, Carolyn Kerr. She is a she is a partner at Brown and Weinraub. And with that, I'm going to just go over the agenda real quick and I'll turn it over to Carolyn. So she's going to talk about recent election outcomes and why they matter, key priorities for legislators and the governor, updates on the New York State budget and what changes could mean for IDD services in 2026, and how to advocate effectively for people with IDD, families and caregivers, and disability service providers. So without further ado, our team here is going to turn off our cameras. We're going to hand it over to Carolyn, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan, and apologies for not being on camera this evening. Many thanks to Sumani for inviting me to present this evening in this series. So as Alan said, we're going to focus on the elections, priorities for the governor, and then delve into what Governor Hochul has proposed for her New York State budget for state fiscal year 26-27, and then talk a little bit about advocacy. So I'm going to start with the elections. I think the last time we spoke was October 15th of 2025, and that was just prior to the New York City mayoral election. And at that time, Assemblymember Zoran Mamdani had won the Democratic primary and was poised to win the New York City mayoral election, which he did do, and was sworn in on January 1st of this year. That election was really important, and it was important because he ran a very, very effective campaign, and it was something that New York City residents really responded very well to. It also got, the way he ran the campaign got national attention, and I think a lot of politicians, not only in New York State but nationally, really paid attention to what he was saying, how he was saying, and that is something that we're going to hear some of the messaging. His message was very clear, focusing on affordability and providing universal childcare and free bus service in New York City. It was easy to remember, and he was very good at sticking to his messaging. And that is something that I think that, we have we have a Democratic majorities in the Assembly and New York State Senate, and factions of that majority have really felt empowered because of what happened in the city, and I think are bringing a lot of that messaging to the state legislature this year. What I will say is some of Mayor Mamdani's focal points, really do require healthy funding, and what he inherited is his budget has deficits that he was not anticipating. And what that will also do is for him to deliver on some of his campaign promises, he will need to be looking toward the New York State to be help fund those priorities. So there will be pressure on the governor and supporters of the mayor to make some of those things reality. So again, that election in the city will have impacts. I do want to just point out that there were some other, Mayor Mamdani was not the only mayor elected. 3 other major New York state cities did have their mayoral elections, Albany, Buffalo, and Syracuse, and all of those were won by the Democratic candidates. Also, nationally, in November 2025, we did see major other national races that were won by the Democratic candidates, notably the gubernatorial elections in New Jersey and in Virginia. So that kind of sets the scene for 2026, which is an election year. Every single assembly member and Senate and state senator in New York will be running for re-election, as will Governor Hochul, Attorney General Tish James, and the Comptroller. That is in addition to the midterm congressional elections. So we do have a number of members of Congress in New York that will also be running for election. On the next slide for budget priorities.
Yep, you got
so
it.
coming into this year, the governor does have some signature focal points. She has come out with her top priority is really builds upon and expands on Mayor Mamdani's initiative to provide. He wants to provide universal childcare across New York City. Governor Hochul has come out with a proposal to provide childcare across New York State. She also has been a longtime advocate on mental health, particularly youth mental health, and she continues to focus on that. She has also adopted a platform around affordability and has specifically focused on, in addition to childcare dilemmas, but also on housing, energy costs, and home and auto insurance affordability specifically. All of this said, she also wants to be very conservative relative to her budgeting because of concerns of what is on the horizon for the state in terms of future deficits. The legislature is a little bit different, positioned a little bit differently in their priorities. They are also very, very focused on affordability. So affordability relative to energy bills, in addition to insurance bills, basic food costs, you name it, that's kind of, they're very focused on anything that makes life more affordable for New Yorkers. But they are also very focused on sustaining the safety net for New Yorkers and maintaining and increasing access to core social services. One of the things that differentiates the legislature with the governor is that the governor does not want to raise taxes. The legislature is, I think, very, very open to raising taxes, particularly corporate taxes, to ensure that their priorities are met. So on the next slide, I wanted, when we last spoke, it was October 15th, and there were significant concerns at that time about the impacts of HR 1. And at that time, the state was thinking, first of all, the state had a deficit of about $7.5 billion. They were also concerned that the HR 1 would have an adverse impact on the state finances in state fiscal year 26-27 of about $3 billion. So that was a pretty hefty deficit at that time. And also the state was grappling with the first year of the Trump administration, where the administration would periodically stop funding for various initiatives that were important, whether they related to transportation, behavioral health funding, things like that. So since that time, since we last spoke, a few things have happened that are important for our conversation here. One is that the state has taken action to mitigate the impacts of HR 1. First of all, they took a look at HR 1 and the various projected impacts to New York State, and there were a number of things that aren't necessarily hitting this in 2026. There's graduated impacts, right, from a timeline perspective. One thing that they did was they saw that they had a big liability relative to a government health insurance program that is not Medicaid, but it looks like Medicaid. It provides insurance for low-income New Yorkers, called the Essential Plan, and it's with eligibility up to 250% of the federal poverty level. The state has applied to essentially eliminate that degree of eligibility and revert back to the basic health plan, which is available to people with up to 200% of federal poverty level, or incomes up to 200% of the federal poverty level. That, because of the way that works, that actually would limit the state's liability under HR 1 significantly. So that $3 billion of the deficit that the state was concerned about in 2025, this action would essentially significantly reduce that liability. The other thing that's happened is that the state has experienced increased tax revenues, so that the projected tax revenues that the state was anticipating have exceeded what they had projected for the past 3 quarters. That plus an overall state spending that was less than anticipated has actually put the state from a deficit position to a surplus position. So the state has more money now than it was anticipating. The deficits for this meaning right now we're in the last quarter of state fiscal year 25-26. We don't have a deficit. We don't have a deficit looking at state fiscal year 26-27, which begins April 1. So and then the federal government keeps pivoting, and they say they're going to cut something, and then they restore the funding. So I think the reality of some of those is, it's still very unpredictable. But then we are seeing various funding get restored on certain things. What I will say is that I mentioned the New York City deficits. The out-year deficits for New York State still remain large and concerning. So once we get past 2027 or past the next state fiscal year, when we start looking at the deficits beginning April 1st, 2027, that starts to, we start to see deficits $6 billion, $9 billion, and then growing to double-digit deficits going forward. So that's one of the reasons as we're talking about now, what the governor introduced for her state budget, why it's a little, we were concerned that it might be quite dire in the fall, but we have a different kind of environment because of those factors. So looking at the budget that she introduced, generally, we just talked about the revenues and the overall financial picture being a little bit better than what we were anticipating. There's other factors that influence what the governor's budget looks like. So it is, again, an election year. So in an election year, the legislators, the governor, the people who are up for re-election generally do not want to be cutting programs, reducing rates doing things that will be received negatively by a voting constituency. And her budget reflects that. There are no broad-based, there are some targeted cuts, but there are no broad-based cuts. She is not, with the exception of one tobacco tax, she is not proposing raising any taxes. And the other thing, usually in the budget, especially relative to health and mental hygiene, there are frequently a lot of policy proposals that are included in the budget that have fiscal impacts, maybe new to launch a new program or do something like that. But this budget does not contain those things. It's pretty, I would say, narrow relative to it maintains much of the spending. In fact, it includes a growth for the Medicaid program of 11.4%. But there are not big new initiatives, either policy initiatives or spending initiatives. So specific to OPWDD and the IDD population, there, we were happy to see that the governor did include a targeted inflationary increase in her budget. We had been concerned going into the budget that maybe she wouldn't include one at all, but she did. It was 1.7%, which is less than what the advocates had asked for. So that Advocates and Human Services had asked for a 2.7% targeted inflationary increase. But 1.7 is a good place to start. And there was also a specific rate increase for family care rate, which again for that very particular program. There were also a number of, not limited to OPW, but initiatives relative to people that really recognize people with disabilities. And I think this governor has done a great job, and particularly under the leadership of Kim Hill, who's the Chief Disability Officer, in addition to Commissioner Baer, really advancing proposals that focus on people with disabilities. So there are initiatives to make significant investments to improve transportation services for people with disabilities, an initiative to create a new assistive technology innovation center designed, again, to provide that type of technology for people with disabilities, grant programs for adaptive clothing. And then the governor's budget generally from some of the initiatives that are included that really benefit all New Yorkers, but thinking about DSPs and things like that, the child care initiative is very significant for providing access to child care for staff and creating more flexibility between a work-life balance. In addition, there's also there's some funding for independent living and supportive housing that's available through the governor's budget. So, when we think about what does this mean for the IDD population, for the providers, the IDD population, their families, providers of services, CCOs, that where we're starting from is a really great place to start from. I think in that sometimes we have proactive agendas where we want to advance various ideas, and it's hard to do that if you have, if the governor is proposing a cut to services, because then all the energy is on restoration of a cut. Or if there are cuts or reductions, if there's multiple cuts or reductions, it's very hard for the legislature to find dollars to fill everything that the governor might look to reduce. But that's not what we have here. So we are in a good position, I think, as we start out, with the governor's budget proposal. So as we think about what we can do from an advocacy perspective, I do want to remind people about the budget timeline. Again, the legislature's in active session from January through June. Half of that time at least is taken up with budget activity. The governor introduced her budget this month, and she'll have an opportunity to make some technical amendments to that. But then the legislature responds, and the first thing they do is they hold budget hearings. So the budget hearing for the mental hygiene budget is set for February 4th, next week. And that will be an opportunity for the legislature to ask lots of questions about the budget. And then in March, they will develop their one-house budget bills. All of these are opportunities, before we go in, as we review the governor's budget, talk to legislators, prepare them for the hearing, and then as they're putting together their one-house budget bills. Those are all opportunities for advocacy. And the budget, the state fiscal year begins April 1. And this year, I think that the governor intentionally submitted a budget to the legislature that did not contain too many controversial things, so that I think with an eye toward maybe everyone could get out on time and start their campaigns, or have the budget done on time, finish up the legislative session with non-budget items, and then so that everyone can kind of get out on time. So where we are in terms of what the advocacy asks are from a CCO perspective, I think one of the main concerns is, while we're super gratified that the governor put in a targeted inflationary increase, it does not include the CCOs. And as you all know, the CCO care managers, they are the connectors for families and individuals from a whole to a whole variety of services beyond OPW, and they are the only ones that do this. It's not fair for them not to be included in the targeted inflationary increase. And when those dollars are not passed through to the CCOs, it really strains the ability to continue to keep up with wage demands. And that's, to the extent that staff turnover or care manager turnover is a frustration, not including the CCOs in the targeted inflationary increase only exacerbates that. The other thing is we want to advocate for an increase in the targeted inflationary increase. Let's assume the CCOs get included, but we do want to advocate for that to be increased from 1.7 to 2.7. What I would say is I've already been talking to legislators who they know they're kind of they're definitely on board. I even heard somebody say 2.7 is not enough. We want to increase it beyond that, which of course no one is going to argue on that. But I think that's that's very they're hearing that from the entire human services sector. So very familiar with that. And the other thing that we want to advocate for, the Governor Hochul, when she put out her call letter to agencies, she said, she asked for flat budgeting, and she also said, I'd like to see some, common sense reforms here that, just make, how do we make life easier for folks, streamline activities, and that don't necessarily cost anything. And one of the, one of those types of initiatives is a bill that Assemblymember Karen McMahon is sponsoring, which is 7284, and that bill would, allow for it would expand the authority for DSPs to administer medications, to engage in tube feeding and diabetic care across OPW certified programs. And so that builds upon, again, it builds upon and recognizes the skills that DSPs already have and would alleviate, just provide a common sense approach to allowing DSPs to do more. So how are we, asking folks to advocate here? We've talked previously about, writing, to your, or communicating with your legislators through letters and emails. CMANI has, or Care Design has a one-click that we're encouraging folks to use, and that's going to get populated. We do want to have people calling their legislators as well. That's also another way to, to connect with them. Also, the legislators they really check their social media. So anything that encourages legislators to act to, include CCOs in the targeted inflationary increase, to make sure that that increase is at least 2.7. Those are messages to get out to them. And of course, in-person visits are important. And that brings us to the CMANI Lobby Day, which we have scheduled for next week. It's February 4th, which it's the same day as the mental hygiene hearing in Albany. And so that we will be targeting, we have a number of meetings set up with legislators and leadership staff, chairs, members of the Disabilities Committee. Whether or not you are able to join us for a lobby day, we did include here, a mechanism to identify and reach your state elected official, as well as contact information for some of our main targets for our advocacy. CMANI is also going to be, in addition to scheduling meetings with the legislators for Lobby Day, we're going to be holding a prep session for Lobby Day tomorrow morning, I believe, and has also been preparing talking points, leave behinds, one-pagers, issue-specific talking points as well. And so those are, I think we're hopeful that, given, that we think that there's maybe some breathing room here in the budget for the legislature to get the CCOs back into the targeted inflationary increase, to increase that TII to what the fields are demanding, and make some other common sense reforms. We are hopeful, but we really need your voices. And I will stop, and we can answer any questions that you might have.
So there's only a couple questions in the chat right now, and one of them may be more for Alan, and it is a question about the meeting being recorded, and if so, where it would be posted for people to be able to see.
Yes, great question. So this presentation is being recorded, and we will share it amongst each of the 7 care coordination organization representatives. And I think many of us have an advocacy webpage on our care coordination organization's website. So check with your respective CCO, and they should be able to point you to it. Person-Centered Services has an advocacy page, and this will be posted there along with the other CMANI webinars that we've done this year.
And then Carolyn, for you, there is a question: if there's a surplus now in the budget, why will there be a deficit come April?
There won't be, not come April. right now the state does not have a deficit for the upcoming state fiscal year. It's the following, like once we, and that's because they are, then we will start to see some of those other impacts of HR1. And that's what they're budgeting. So I think they're concerned that, right now where it's kind of like we have a little bit of a respite, but I think the concern is that, okay, it's a respite. It's not a permanent, it's not a permanent situation. We will see, structural changes that are going to be made to the Medicaid program, and that will have impact on New York State's financial picture.
Okay. Carolyn, I do have a few questions from someone about is there regarding the governor, is there any auditing and tracking of the promises made versus the delivery of those promises?
I think that's, I think she has, I think you'd have to go, back and maybe there's some organizations that take a look at that. But certainly she, to the extent she has focused on mental, kind of mental health initiatives, those are things where she has invested and, invested dollars. And again, not necessarily OPW, this is primarily OMH. She's invested dollars, she's created programmatic initiatives. She's been focused a lot of initiatives on kids in terms of the, no cell phones in schools, which that has been implemented. So there, I think it depends on what you're looking at, because there are a lot of different areas where the governor can definitely point to, follow through on promises made, promises kept.
And are the CCOs looking at any cut to their budget, or are they just looking at not receiving the adjustment?
We are not aware of any rate cut to the CCOs. But what I would say is, if you think about it, inflation is a cost, and if that is not covered in the rates, then it serves as a cut, right? Because the expenses are going up and the rates are not changing. So even though this would be the third year that would have happened. So I think that's something that we are very concerned. We have taken a look at the aggregate financials of the CCOs, and the margin is pretty narrow. So if the margin is pretty narrow, like 1% right now, and then inflation and wage demands, continue to go up, that starts to put that margin into negative territory, and that's why we're very concerned.
Ellen, I feel like I'm going to call back on you with a couple questions. Will there be a transcript of this meeting sent out to those who are on this meeting, or will they just be able to access it through websites?
The recording of this will be available through websites. I'm not sure if I can provide a transcript of the meeting. If possible, I could try to include a transcript with the meeting, but the recording will be available.
And also, are there any sample letters for individuals and families to use to contact their local representatives?
Carolyn, do you want to talk about the one-click letter? Because that could be used through email, right? Or that may be able to.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how one-click. I don't know if we do. The short answer is there is a letter that we can make available. I just maybe someone who's more familiar with the mechanics of one-click can help.
I can answer that, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. It's Kathy Verano. The one-click that we're referring to is a tool. It's a very easy tool. So each of the 7 CCOs will have access to that. And I would anticipate we'll send out our first distribution to all of you and all of our members by Monday or Tuesday at the latest, so that the timing really does coincide with our our Legislative Advocacy Day. The tool can be modified, so you can go in, you can click it, it will tell you your own representatives based on your address. So you can use what's there as a template, or you can personalize it. It's really each person's choice.
Thank you, Kathy. And there is a question about where the recording will be available. Each of the CCOs does have a web page, and many of them with advocacy pages, and you should be able to find the recording there. As far as questions, that's all that have come through at the moment. Oh, yeah.
So I see another question that came in that is regarding fiscal intermediaries and somebody looking to start the self-direction process. And that would be a great question to contact your care manager with, or your care coordination organization. If you contact their customer service line, they should be able to connect you with your care manager, or someone who can help you with your specific issue. So if there's no other questions for this evening, I just want to thank everyone for attending with us tonight. Again, the recording, I want to thank Carolyn Kerr from Brown and Weinraub for a wonderful presentation on where we're at on the 2026 New York State budget. And again, look to your respective care coordination organization. Many of us have an advocacy webpage where you'll be able to find the recording and other resources on how to share your story and engage with your local legislators as well. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.